Don't drink the water. If you had lived in medieval Europe, this would not have been advice. It would have been survival law. Today, water is life. We carry bottles everywhere. We filter it, mineralize it, debate its pH and purity. We assume water is the safest thing a human can consume. But for most people living between the 5th and the 15th century, water was the most dangerous drink in the city. And here is the part that sounds insane to the modern mind. Children drank beer. Monks drank beer. Farmers drank beer from dawn to dusk. Even the sick were given beer. Not because they loved getting drunk, but because beer was safer than water. This story is not about alcohol. It is about microbiology, forgotten technology, and a world where clean water simply did not exist. And once you understand why medieval people avoided water, you may never look at modern sanitation the same way again. Walk into a medieval city. No paved roads, no plumbing, no sewers beneath your feet. Waste flows where gravity allows it. Human waste, animal waste, rotting food, dead rats, slaughterhouse blood, tanneries dumping chemical runoff. All of it ends up in the same place: the river, the well, the public fountain, the same water people drink from. There is no concept of upstream contamination, no understanding of bacteria, parasites, or viruses, no germ theory. Water looks clear, so people assume it is safe, and then they die. Dysentery, cholera-like illnesses, typhoid, parasites that hollow the body from the inside, infant mortality rates that today would feel apocalyptic, whole neighborhoods wiped out not by war, but by water. This was not rare. This was normal. Now here is the paradox. Medieval people were not stupid. They didn't know why water killed them, but they knew that it did. So they adapted. They stopped trusting water, and instead, they turned to fermentation. Beer in the Middle Ages was not what you imagine today. No IPAs, no high alcohol, no parties. Most medieval beer was small beer, a weak, cloudy brew with very low alcohol content, often between 1% and 2%. You could drink it all day without intoxication. And everyone did. Why? Because beer went through a process that water did not. Boiling, fermentation, acidity. 3 silent killers of pathogens. When grain was mashed and boiled, many microbes died. When yeast fermented sugars, alcohol and acids formed. Hostile environments for disease. When hops, later, were added, their antibacterial properties further protected the drink. Beer was not sterile, but compared to medieval water, it was infinitely safer. This is where modern people get confused. They imagine medieval society constantly drunk, but intoxication was not the goal. Survival was. Beer was liquid bread, calories, carbohydrates, minerals. For peasants working 12-hour days in the fields, beer was fuel. For monks fasting from solid food, beer was nutrition that did not break religious rules. For children, beer was often safer than milk, because milk spoiled quickly and carried disease. So yes, children drank beer, not because adults were irresponsible, but because water was worse. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Medieval people lived in a world without safe infrastructure. No filtration, no chlorination, no sewage separation. Their environment was biologically hostile, and beer was a technology, a biological hack that allowed them to survive inside it. They didn't drink beer because they wanted alcohol. They drank beer because it was the only reliable, clean liquid they had. But this raises a disturbing question. If water was so deadly, why didn't medieval people just boil it and drink it? Some did. But boiling water costs fuel. Firewood was expensive, time-consuming to gather, often reserved for cooking food, not drinks. Beer, on the other hand, was brewed in batches. One boiling process could produce hundreds of liters of safe liquid. It was efficient. It was scalable. It was community-based. Beer was not a luxury. It was infrastructure. This is where history gets interesting. Because beer did not begin as recreation, it began as public health. Long before modern science, humans accidentally discovered that fermentation made liquids safer. And once they discovered it, they never forgot. Until modern times. Think about this. For thousands of years, humans avoided raw water whenever possible. They drank fermented drinks, beer, wine, mead, kvass. Across cultures, across continents, different recipes, same logic. Fermentation protected life. And then, suddenly, within the last 150 years, we flipped the script. We built pipes, we built sewers, we built filtration plants. For the first time in history, water became safer than beer. And we forgot why beer existed in the first place. But medieval people never had that luxury. When they said, "Don't drink the water," they were not being dramatic. They were being rational. They were responding to centuries of lived experience. Experience written in graves. In the next part of this story, we will go deeper. We will follow the water itself, from wells to rivers, from monasteries to taverns, from countryside to city. And we will uncover how medieval sanitation, or the lack of it, shaped one of the most misunderstood drinking cultures in human history. Because beer was not a vice. It was a shield. And water? Water was the enemy. Water did not become dangerous overnight. It became dangerous when humans settled down. When people stopped moving, started building cities, and concentrated waste into tight spaces, water transformed from a neutral element into a carrier of death. Medieval Europe was the perfect storm. Cities grew faster than infrastructure. Population density exploded. Animals lived inside city walls. Industries dumped waste directly into streams. And every drop of rain washed all of it downhill, into wells, rivers, and cisterns. Water was no longer just water. It was information. And the information it carried was lethal. Consider a medieval well. It looks deep, isolated, clean. But underground, water does not respect human boundaries. Waste from latrines seeped through soil. Graveyards leaked decomposition into groundwater. Animal pens drained into the same aquifers. A well was not a sealed system. It was a biological lottery. Some days you survived. Some days you didn't. Rivers were worse. They were highways of commerce and sewage. Upstream, someone washed clothes, someone dumped butcher waste, someone emptied a chamber pot. Downstream, another family drank, and nobody understood the connection. They noticed patterns. People near this river get sick. After heavy rain, children die. This well is cursed. But without germ theory, they couldn't isolate cause. So they relied on instinct, and instinct said, avoid water. This is where monasteries changed everything. Monks were among the most educated people of the medieval world. They observed, they recorded, they experimented, and they brewed. Monasteries became centers of fermentation technology. They refined beer recipes not for pleasure, but for reliability. Consistent boiling, controlled fermentation, cleaner vessels. Monastic beer was safer than almost any other liquid available, and people noticed. Pilgrims sought monastery beer. Towns copied their methods. Brewing knowledge spread outward like a quiet revolution. Not because monks wanted to intoxicate Europe, but because they wanted to keep people alive. Beer also solved another invisible problem: nutrition. Water carries no calories. Beer did. Grain sugars, B vitamins, minerals from malt. In a world where famine was common and diets were thin, beer filled gaps. It strengthened the weak, sustained laborers, helped bodies recover from illness. This is why medieval records describe beer as liquid bread, because that is exactly what it was. Now imagine being a medieval parent. Your child is thirsty. You have three options: water from the river that smells faintly wrong, milk that spoils within hours and often carries disease, Weak beer that has been boiled, fermented, and proven safe. Which do you choose? From a modern perspective, giving a child beer sounds insane. From a medieval perspective, not giving beer was reckless. This is the gap modern minds struggle to cross. We judge the past using infrastructure we did not build. But there is another reason medieval people trusted beer. They could see it work. Water killed silently. Beer protected visibly. Villages that brewed regularly suffered fewer outbreaks. Households that relied on beer survived plagues better. Travelers learned quickly which towns had good beer and which did not. Beer became associated with safety. Water became associated with risk. Not through theory, through survival. Then there were emergencies. Sieges. When a city was cut off, clean water disappeared first. Wells were poisoned, rivers blocked. Rain captured in filthy containers. But grain could be stored, and beer could be brewed inside walls. In times of war, beer kept cities alive. Water betrayed them. This created a deep cultural memory, a learned distrust of raw water, one passed down not in textbooks, but in habits. Drink beer with meals, give beer to workers, offer beer to guests. Water was for washing. Beer was for living. This is why medieval taverns were not just social spaces. They were hydration stations. They were public health nodes. A place where you could drink without gambling your life. And yes, people gathered, talked, laughed, but that was secondary. The primary function was safety. Now pause and reflect on something unsettling. For thousands of years, humans evolved alongside bacteria. They learned, by trial and death, which processes neutralized danger. Fermentation was one of the most important discoveries in human survival. And yet today, we treat beer as indulgence. We treat fermentation as optional. We trust water without question, because modern systems protect us. But medieval people had no such shield, so they built one themselves, out of yeast. This does not mean medieval life was healthy, far from it. Life expectancy was low. Disease was rampant. Death was common. But beer reduced one massive risk. It removed waterborne illness from the daily equation. And that mattered. A lot. In the final part of this story, we will confront the turning point. The moment when water became safe again. When pipes replaced barrels. When science replaced instinct. And when beer lost its original role, not because it failed, but because something else finally worked better. And we will ask a dangerous question. What other ancient survival knowledge have we discarded, simply because modern systems made us forget it ever mattered? The war between water and beer did not end because beer lost. It ended because water finally changed. For most of human history, water was a gamble. In the 19th century, it became a system, and that transformation quietly erased one of the oldest survival strategies humans ever developed. The turning point was not cultural, it was technological. Cities reached a breaking point. Population density soared beyond anything medieval infrastructure could handle. Epidemics no longer came in waves, they became permanent threats. Cholera, typhoid, dysentery. Entire cities paralyzed. Governments could no longer ignore the problem. So for the first time, water was treated not as a natural gift, but as an engineered substance. Pipes replaced wells. Sewers separated waste from drinking sources. Filtration removed visible contaminants. Chlorination killed what could not be seen. This was revolutionary, not because people suddenly became smarter, but because science finally caught up with instinct. When microbes were discovered, medieval logic was proven right. Water had always been dangerous. They just didn't know why. Once water became reliably safe, beer lost its original purpose. It no longer had to protect people from disease. So its role shifted. From survival to leisure, from nourishment to recreation, from infrastructure to indulgence. And slowly, the memory faded. Children stopped drinking beer. Workers stopped relying on it for hydration. Water reclaimed its place as the default drink. Beer stayed, but as a shadow of its former self. Here is the irony. When modern people look back at medieval beer consumption, they laugh. They see ignorance. They see excess. They see a lack of self-control. But what they are really seeing is adaptation. Medieval people solved a problem with the tools they had. Fermentation was not a cultural accident. It was biological engineering without microscopes. And now comes the uncomfortable question. What else did they understand, intuitively, that we have forgotten? Because this pattern repeats. Again and again, ancient practices dismissed as superstition, until science circles back and validates them. Fermented foods, slow preparation, natural preservation, microbial balance. Beer was just one example. Modern systems work, until they don't. When pipes fail, when disasters strike, when infrastructure collapses, suddenly the old knowledge matters again. Boil it. Ferment it. Don't trust clarity. Trust process. These are not medieval ideas. They are human ones. So the next time you hear someone say, people in the Middle Ages were stupid, they drank beer instead of water, remember this. They weren't avoiding water because they loved beer. They were avoiding water because they loved life. And beer, cloudy, weak, unglamorous beer, was the technology that kept them alive. Water had to earn our trust. And for most of history, it hadn't.